All right, let's talk about bosses. You've had good ones, you've probably had some not so good ones. But what's the difference? Today we're unpacking the whole world of management, what it is, how it actually works, and why it's a huge deal in pretty much every part of our lives.
I mean, seriously, you see managers everywhere, right? In the office, at the coffee shop, running a construction crew. But what is it they actually do all day? It can seem a little mysterious. So let's pull back the curtain and dive right in, starting with the fundamentals.
Okay, so to really get what a manager is, we first got to understand the playground they're in. And that playground in the business world is called an organization.
Now, I know organization sounds kind of formal, maybe a little stuffy, but it's actually super simple. Think about it. Your favorite coffee shop, a huge tech company, or even the local sports team, they're all organizations, and every single one of them has the same three key things in common.
So what are those three things? Well, first, every organization has a distinct purpose, a reason it exists. Second, it's made of people. And third, it has a deliberate structure, some kind of system for how everyone works together. You put those three things together, purpose, people, and structure, and boom, you've set the stage for a manager to step in.
And that's where the manager comes in. A manager is basically the person who coordinates the people inside that structure to hit the organization's purpose. They're like the conductor of an orchestra. They're not playing every instrument, but they're making sure everyone plays together to create something amazing.
And not all managers are the same. They operate at different levels, kind of like a pyramid. Down at the base, you have your first-line managers. Think shift supervisors or team leads. They're the ones directly overseeing the people doing the actual work. Then you've got middle managers, who manage those first-line managers. And way up at the top, you have the top managers making the huge strategic decisions for the whole company. Okay, so we know who managers are and where they fit. But now for the big question. What do they do? Well, we can break it down by looking at their job through three different lenses. Think of them as three essential toolkits: their functions, their roles, and their skills. Let's start with toolkit number 1, functions. This is kind of the classic textbook way of looking at a manager's job. It's basically a 4-step process, a cycle that just keeps going.
First up, you've got planning. This is where you define goals and figure out the strategy. Then you move to organizing, which is all about arranging the work and who does what. Step 3 is leading. This is the people part, motivating and guiding your team. And finally, there's controlling, which is just a fancy word for monitoring performance and making sure you're actually hitting those goals. And then the cycle starts all over again.
But, a manager's day is rarely that neat and tidy. It's often messy and unpredictable. So that brings us to our second toolkit, roles. The idea here is that managers are constantly switching hats depending on what's going on.
A researcher named Henry Mintzberg actually found they juggle about 10 different roles that fall into 3 big buckets. For instance, sometimes they're in an interpersonal role, like being a figurehead at an event. Other times, it's informational. They're the person spreading key info to the team. And then there's the decisional role, where they suddenly have to be a disturbance handler and put out a fire. It's all about adapting.
All right, so that brings us to our third and final toolkit, skills. Because let's face it, to perform all those functions and juggle all those roles, you've got to have some specific skills. And what's super interesting here is how the importance of these skills changes as a manager climbs the corporate ladder. See, at the bottom, technical skills are king. You need to know the nuts and bolts of the job. But as you go up, conceptual skills, the ability to see the big picture, become way more important. And the one skill that's absolutely vital at every single level, you guessed it, human skills. Dealing with people is always key. Okay. So managers have these toolkits, functions, roles, skills. They're busy. But what's the end game? Well, it really boils down to this super important balancing act between 2 big ideas. And those 2 ideas are efficiency and effectiveness. They sound similar, but they're totally different. Efficiency means doing things right, using the least amount of time, money, and effort. But effectiveness means doing the right things, choosing the correct goals to begin with. A great manager has to nail both.
This little chart says it all. The goal, the holy grail, is that top right corner. You're being both effective and efficient. You're hitting the right targets without wasting a thing. And the absolute worst place to be? Yeah, that bottom left corner. That's when you're wasting resources on goals that don't even matter. Yikes!
So this way of thinking about management, it hasn't been around forever. The ideas have actually changed a ton over the last 100 years or so. So let's do a quick time travel moment and see how the idea of a boss has evolved.
I mean, look at this journey. We started in the early 1900s, treating companies like machines that could be perfectly engineered. Then, things got shaken up by stuff like the Hawthorne studies, when we realized, hey, people have feelings. And that led us all the way to today, where we see organizations as these complex, ever-changing systems.
Back in the day, you had guys like Frederick W. Taylor and his scientific management. They were completely obsessed with efficiency. The whole idea was to study every single movement a worker made to find the one, single, absolute best way to do a job. It was all about maximizing output. But then, the game changed. This is where the behavioral approach comes in. Thanks to these famous studies, researchers had this huge light bulb moment. And it sounds so obvious to us now, but back then it was mind-blowing. People aren't just cogs in a machine. Their feelings, their relationships, all that stuff actually has a massive impact on how well they work.
And that brings us pretty much up to date with ideas like the contingency approach. The big takeaway here is so important. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. The best way to manage depends on, well, everything. The situation, the people, the kind of work you're doing. It's all about being flexible.
Whew, okay. We've gone through what a manager is, what they do, and how we got here. But let's get real for a second. Why should you care about any of this?
Here's the bottom line. First, good management is needed everywhere. And second, look at your career. At some point, you're either going to be a manager or you're going to have a manager. There's no escaping it. So understanding these principles, it's not just academic. It's going to help you be better at your job, whichever role you're in. So there you have it. Management unpacked. We've taken a look under the hood at the ideas that really shape our daily work lives. But you know, things are always evolving. So I'll leave you with this question to chew on. As the world of work keeps changing with stuff like AI and remote teams, what does the great manager of tomorrow need to master?